In 1995, an old woman sat in a chair by a window in Queens and watched the evening traffic bleed into headlights. She was 83, and her hands thin as paper, stubborn as rope, trembled as she lifted a cup of tea. Her grandchildren were in the next room, laughing too loudly at something on television. Life, noisy and ordinary, the way it's supposed to be. And still, every time a siren wailed, every time a wind slapped rain against glass, the same sentence rose in her chest like a prayer and a wound at once. Swim to the light. She had been 5 years old the first time she heard it, and she had spent a lifetime trying to understand what it meant. October 1917. The Atlantic was not an ocean. It was a living thing, dark-backed, cold-breathed, patient. The passenger ship pushed forward anyway, a floating city of iron and steam, packed with people who had sold their rings, their goats, their last square of land to buy a ticket toward America. Third class was the belly of that city. It smelled of damp wool, garlic wrapped in cloth, bodies pressed too close. It smelled of hope, too fresh bread remembered from home, the sharp scent of oranges someone had saved for the crossing, the ink of letters being written to relatives who already lived in New York. Antonio Russo did not smell hope. He smelled fear, because fear was practical, like a hammer, like a nail. Fear kept your hands steady. Fear kept your child alive. He was 28, a carpenter's hands, cut and calloused, with the kind of strength that didn't show off. On the first day at sea, he had built a tiny toy boat out of scrap wood he found near the cargo crates, nothing more than a wedge and a bent nail, but it floated in a wash basin and made Maria giggle so hard she hiccuped. His daughter's laugh was the only warm thing he had left. Maria had her mother's curls, soft and dark, always falling into her eyes. Sometimes she pushed them back the way her mother used to, and Antonio had to look away fast, because grief could strike like a wave when you weren't braced for it. 2 years earlier, his wife had died in childbirth. The child did not live. Maria had stared at the bed afterward with a confusion too large for her small face and asked, "When will Mama wake up?" Antonio had told her, soon, because men said stupid things when they were drowning. Then poverty had tightened around them like a rope. Work vanished. Food thinned. The village grew quiet in that particular way that means everyone is hungry and no one wants to admit it. America became not a dream, but a door. New York, Antonio would whisper at night, as if the word itself might become a lantern. There will be work. There will be bread. You'll learn English. You'll wear shoes with no holes. You'll have a future that doesn't smell like mildew and sorrow. Maria would press her cheek into his shoulder. Will Mama be there? And Antonio would swallow and say, "She'll be proud of you, Piccola." On the ship, Maria clung to him as if the sea could steal him away in daylight. She hated the loud groan of metal, the way the walls vibrated like something angry behind them. She hated the strangers, so many faces, so many languages, all crowded together. On the second night, a woman named Giovanna offered Maria a piece of hard candy from a tin and told her, "Chew slowly, little bird. It makes the ocean behave." She winked as if she and the sea had an agreement. Maria's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Giovanna said. "And if the ocean doesn't listen, we tell it stories until it falls asleep." Antonio watched them and felt the smallest easing in his ribs. Strangers, yes, but also a kind of family, stitched together by the same desperation. It was easier to believe in safety when you weren't alone. The storm began like a rumor. At dinner, the spoons rattled a little more. The ship shivered, not from cold, but from a warning deep in its bones. A few men muttered about the weather, about the Atlantic in October, about how the war had made routes strange and dangerous. The talk of submarines hovered like a shadow, but everyone tried to push it away. "We'll be in New York in days," someone said. "Then we'll laugh at this." That night, the air changed. Antonio noticed it first because carpenters notice pressure the way wood tightens before a crack, the way a nail bends when the load shifts. The ship's belly felt heavier. Maria woke up crying softly. "Papa, the boat is angry." Antonio pulled her into his arms. Her skin was warm, her heart beat fast. He smoothed her hair back and listened. Above them, somewhere beyond the thin metal ceiling, the wind had begun to speak. Not a whistle, not a sigh, a voice low and rising, like an animal turning its head. "Just a little weather," Antonio murmured, but his own stomach tightened. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, as if pretending nothing was wrong. At first, It was only rocking enough to make people grip the edges of bunks and laugh nervously. Someone started praying. Someone else tried to sing to drown it out. Then the ship lurched. A suitcase slid across the floor and slammed into a post. A baby screamed. The sound was swallowed by another sound, water, heavy as a thrown door, hitting the side of the ship. Boom! The whole world tilted. Antonio felt the sudden, sickening weightlessness that comes when the floor is no longer trustworthy. He stood fast, instinctively widening his stance the way he did on a ladder in high wind, and wrapped both arms around Maria. The next wave struck like a fist. Boom! Metal groaned. Dishes shattered somewhere above. The lights went out. In the dark, the third-class compartment filled with voices, people shouting names, mothers crying for children, men cursing God in 3 different dialects. A lantern was lit, small, trembling flame, and for a second Antonio saw fear on every face, raw and shining, like wet stone. Then the water came, not a trickle, not a leak, a surge, cold and fast, pouring in through a broken seam, through a hatch that had given up. It rolled along the floor like a creature set free, rising in a heartbeat to ankles, then calves. Someone shoved, someone fell. The lantern slipped from a hand and went out with a hiss. Panic is not loud at first. It's tight. It's people moving at once, pressing toward the stairway, breath turning sharp and animal. Antonio lifted Maria up, her small body suddenly weightless in his arms, and pushed into the crowd. "Stay with me," he shouted into her ear. "Hold on." Maria's fingers locked around his neck. "Papa, Papa, I'm scared." "I know, little bird," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Look at me. Breathe. I've got you." The water rose. It climbed his knees, his thighs. It was so cold it burned. The corridor became a throat. People jammed shoulder to shoulder, trying to climb toward the deck, toward air, toward light. The ship listed harder, making the stairway feel like a wall. Bodies pressed, slipped, screamed. Antonio tried to keep Maria above the water. He held her up like an offering, like the only thing that mattered in a world that was breaking apart. A woman's hand grabbed his sleeve. "My son, please." He couldn't stop. If he stopped, they would all go down. A man shoved past, eyes wild. Someone's elbow struck Antonio's ribs. Maria cried out, "Papa." Antonio fought forward, muscles shaking, lungs burning with salt and fear. He could see the stairway now, could see a sliver of lighter darkness above where the deck might be. And then another wave hit. The ship's angle changed sharply, as if the sea had grabbed it by the shoulder and forced it down. The crowd surged backward. The water surged forward. Antonio's boot lost purchase. He slammed into the wall. For a fraction of a second, he thought he would drop Maria. He didn't, but he understood something in that instant, something terrible and clear, like a nail driven clean through wood. They would never reach the lifeboats. Not like this. Not from here. Not in time. His eyes searched wildly along the corridor, along the metal ribs of the ship. Anything, any opening, any path that wasn't the choking stairway. That's when he saw it. A porthole, shattered by the storm, glass gone, edges jagged. A black mouth open to the night. Beyond it, the Atlantic, roaring. And farther still, in the distance, a moving sweep of white searchlights. Rescue boats, coming closer. Hope, not in words, but in hard light on water. Antonio pulled Maria tighter, turned her small face toward his. Her cheeks were wet, her lips were blue tinged from cold, her eyes were huge with terror and trust. "Papa." He swallowed. His heart beat so hard it felt like it might split his ribs. He looked at the porthole. He looked back at his daughter, and the choice rose inside him like a blade. "Maria," he whispered, forcing calm into his voice the way a man forces a door shut against a storm. "Listen to me. Listen, look at me. You're going to do something very brave." Maria's fingers tightened. "I can't," she sobbed. "You can," Antonio said, and his voice broke just a little. "Because you're my daughter." The ship groaned again, louder this time. The corridor shook. Water slapped at his chest. People screamed as the angle worsened. Antonio moved toward the shattered porthole. The opening was small, too small for him, just big enough for a child. He pressed his forehead to Maria's for one heartbeat, one breath, one whole world. Outside, the searchlight swept closer, carving a path of silver on black water. "Swim to the light," something inside him whispered. He held her up to the jagged opening. Maria looked down into the ocean and screamed, "Papa, no." Antonio's hands trembled, not from cold, from love. And then he drew in a breath that tasted like salt, iron, and goodbye. And he began to lift her through. Maria fought him. Not with strength, she was 5. She was tiny, but with the whole desperate power of a child who believes a father is a law of nature. Fathers don't let go. Fathers don't hand you to darkness. Papa, please, she shrieked, clawing at his shirt. I'll be good. I'll be good. I know, Antonio whispered, voice raw. I know, my heart. The jagged rim of the porthole bit into his palms as the ship shuddered. Cold water slammed against his ribs. Behind him, the corridor roared with panic, people praying, begging, swearing, names torn from throats like cloth ripping. Antonio leaned close, close enough that his breath warmed her ear for one final second. Maria, he said, you must listen. Do you see the light? She sobbed so hard she couldn't answer. He turned her small face with his thumb until her eyes caught the distant sweep, the searchlight that broke the night open in pale arcs. There, he said, that is your road. That is where life is. Maria's gaze clung to the light like a drowning thing clings to a plank. The beam slid across the water, disappeared, returned. It's moving, she cried. It will come back, Antonio said, although he did not know if he was speaking to her or to God. When it comes back, you swim to it. You do not look behind you. You do not stop. You swim like you have 1,000 hearts. The ship heaved. The porthole dipped closer to the waterline. Now, Antonio pushed. Maria's body slipped through the opening, her coat snagging for a heartbeat. Antonio yanked it free, tearing fabric and maybe skin, and then she was gone, swallowed by black. Her scream vanished into the storm like a spark in a furnace. Antonio's own scream ripped out of him, feral, enormous, the sound of a man tearing his own soul in half. Maria. He lunged toward the porthole, but a wave slammed him back against the corridor wall. He caught the rim again, fingers bleeding, and shoved his face toward the opening. The Atlantic churned below, moonless, a moving grave. But then there, a smaller shape breaking the surface, flailing, a white hand flashing. Maria. She surfaced long enough to cry his name. Antonio felt something inside him crack, and still he forced his voice to become a rope. Swim, Maria, he bellowed, throat shredding. Swim to the light. The boats are coming, swim. A searchlight swept nearer, painting the water in a strip of ghostly silver. Maria turned toward it, not understanding, only obeying. Her arms thrashed, her legs kicked in frantic little bursts. Antonio could see her for a second, then a wave swallowed her. No, no, he gasped. She came up again, coughing, shrieking, then vanished again. Antonio kept shouting. He shouted until his chest burned, until his tongue tasted blood, until his own voice became nothing but a broken bell in the storm. Swim, to the light, Maria, to the light. Someone grabbed his shoulder from behind. A man's face, half submerged, eyes wide with terror. Help me, help. Antonio didn't turn. He couldn't. The only world he had left was the circle of that porthole and the small child fighting for breath beyond it. Then the ship groaned a deep, final sound, like an animal finally giving up. The angle steepened. The corridor became a waterfall. People slid. The water surged. Antonio's boots lost the floor. He clung to the porthole rim with both hands, arms shaking, and looked one last time into the ocean. The searchlight cut across the waves and caught Maria again. For a heartbeat, she was visible, hair plastered to her face, mouth open in a silent cry, eyes huge with panic. Then the beam moved on, and the sea closed. Antonio understood then, not as an idea but as a physical truth, that he would never touch her again. He released the rim, not because he chose to die, because the ship chose it for him. The Atlantic rose like a wall and took everything. 7 minutes later, the passenger ship disappeared beneath the storm. 45 minutes is a short time on a clock. It is forever in cold water. Maria did not swim like a trained swimmer. She thrashed. She choked. She went under and came up with lungs full of fire. The ocean slapped her face as if angry at her for refusing to vanish. She remembered the light, how it moved, how it returned. She remembered her father's voice, huge above the storm, telling her the light was life. And so she chased it. Each time the searchlight swept over her, she saw her own hands, small bones, pale skin, shaking as if they belonged to someone else. She saw foam. She saw the black mouth of the ocean opening under her. She screamed, "Papa," until her throat became sand. No answer came. At some point she stopped screaming, not because she stopped hoping, because she had no air left for hope. When the rescue boat finally reached her, the men almost missed her. She was so small, so quiet, so close to becoming another piece of debris. Then a sailor saw something, just a flicker of white in the sweep of the light, and pointed. There. They hauled her out like a miracle and a corpse at once. Her body was rigid with cold. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her lips were purple. When they wrapped her in blankets, she didn't cry. She stared at the men's faces as if they were speaking underwater. Someone asked her name. She didn't understand. Someone said, "Italian? Is she Italian?" Maria finally whispered a word, just one, because it was the only word that still belonged to her. "Papa." They took her to a hospital ship. A nurse pressed warm cloths to her chest and rubbed her tiny hands until blood remembered it was supposed to move. The nurse's mouth formed gentle sounds Maria couldn't catch. A doctor frowned. Severe hypothermia. Shock. A blanket. Another blanket. Hot broth she couldn't swallow. A woman with tired eyes bent close and tried Italian. "Come ti chiami, piccola? What is your name?" Maria stared at her. "My," she rasped, and then the words tangled. Her mind was a room full of water. The woman nodded, patient. "It's okay. It's okay." They wrote a known child on a chart. Then, hours later, when Maria's lips finally stopped trembling enough to shape language, she whispered, "Maria. Maria Russo." "Russo," the nurse repeated gently. "Where is your mother?" Maria's face creased, as if the question itself hurt. "Mama sleeping." "And your father?" Maria blinked. For a second she saw him, his face lit by a lantern in the third-class darkness, his eyes bright with a fear he refused to show her. She heard him shouting, "Swim to the light." "My father," she said, and then the image in her mind did something strange. It shifted, it twisted, because 5-year-olds do not understand sacrifice. They understand only the moment of release. She whispered, voice shaking, "Through me." The nurse's hands paused. The nurse did not correct her. The nurse didn't know how. And so the first seed of misunderstanding planted itself in Maria's heart. Not hatred, confusion, the kind that grows teeth over time. New York in 1917 smelled like coal smoke and wet stone. The city was loud in a way that made Maria flinch. Wagons, shouting men, clanging streetcars, languages colliding like waves. Maria was placed in an orphanage. The building was clean, but clean does not mean kind. Clean can be cold. Clean can be rules and schedules and the quiet shame of being no one's child. Maria learned English the way children learn anything fast, because she had to. She learned to fold her blanket the right way. She learned to line up, to raise her hand, to swallow tears when other children were adopted, and she remained. Sometimes a couple would come to look at the children. Maria would stand straight, hair brushed, hands clasped, heart pounding like it wanted to leap out and run into their arms. They would glance at her chart. "Italian." Someone would murmur, "5." Another would say, "Not a baby." And they would move on. At night, Maria would lie in her bed and press her fingers against the wall as if she could feel the ocean behind it. Her father's voice would come back, not his words, but his tone. Urgent, loving, final. She would whisper into the dark, "Papa, where are you?" Sometimes she imagined he had survived. Men survived things. Men came back. In her mind he would walk through the orphanage doors, soaked but smiling, saying, "I'm here, piccola. I'm here." She held that fantasy for years like a talisman. But children grow. Hope changes shape. And when hope is not fed, it begins to starve and become something else. By the time Maria was 10, she started asking questions that frightened the nuns. "Why didn't he come?" she demanded. "Why didn't he find me?" They would say, "The sea took him." But they had no proof, no body, no grave, no certainty, only lists and rumors and the awkward silence that followed. "Maybe he's alive," Maria insisted, voice fierce. "Maybe he doesn't want me." At 13, she watched a father meet his daughter outside a school. He lifted her easily, spun her around, laughed into her hair. Maria stood behind a fence and felt something twist in her chest. He did that. He held her up, and then he let go. At 15, she started to think the unthinkable. Maybe he didn't save me. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he just needed less weight to fight his way out. Maybe he threw her away the way a man throws away luggage when a ship is sinking. It was a cruel thought. It felt like treason. And yet it also explained the pain. It gave the pain a reason. So Maria carried it. She carried it into adulthood. She worked in a garment factory. She married a kind man who smelled like soap and warm bread. She had children, 4 of them, loud and alive and stubborn. And still, at night, she dreamed of the porthole. In the dream, She was always 5. In the dream, the ocean was always black. In the dream, her father's hands were always pushing. She would wake up shaking, heart racing, and stare at the ceiling while her husband slept beside her, unaware that his wife was drowning again in memory. Then she would whisper, almost angrily, to the darkness, "Why did you do it?" The truth came to her when she was 30. It arrived not in a dramatic confession, not in a cinematic moment, because truth rarely does. It arrived the way most life-changing things arrive, through paperwork, through someone else's obsession, through a small envelope that did not look like destiny. A researcher had been studying passenger lists from the 1917 disaster. Names, ages, nationalities, the forgotten dead. He found Antonio Russo, carpenter, 28, third class, listed among the lost. The researcher tracked down records, orphanage placements, immigration files, threads in a city-sized tapestry. And then, one afternoon, Maria received a letter. She held it for a long time before opening it, as if the paper itself might explode. Inside were copies of documents and a short note explaining what the researcher believed: that Antonio Russo had not abandoned his daughter, that he had pushed her through a porthole because it was the only way she could reach the rescuers. Maria read the words once, twice, a third time. Then her hands started to shake so hard she couldn't hold the paper. Her mind flashed back not to the porthole, not to the falling, but to something she had forgotten. His eyes, not fear, not selfishness. A kind of sorrow so enormous it had filled the corridor. A sorrow that said, "I am choosing your life over mine." Maria's breath came out as a broken sound. She slid down to the kitchen floor, documents scattering like feathers, and pressed both palms to her face. For a long time she did not cry. She simply sat there, stunned, while her entire life rearranged itself. Because if he had not abandoned her, then the story she had carried like a stone for 25 years was wrong. And wrongness does not vanish gently. It shatters. It leaves sharp edges. When Maria finally began to weep, it was not the neat crying of sadness. It was the crying of revelation. It was grief meeting gratitude, colliding like waves. It was a grown woman finally understanding what a father had done in the dark. In 1995, at 83, she told an interviewer, "I thought my father was killing me. I didn't understand he was saving me." Her voice in the recording is thin but steady. Her eyes, in the photograph beside the article, look like a sea that has finally calmed, but you can still tell what storms have lived there. "For many years I believed he had abandoned me," she continued. "The truth is, he was giving me to the world his whole life." By then, she had lived a long, ordinary miracle. She had married. She had raised 4 children. She had watched 9 grandchildren run through her house like sunlight. She had held 6 great-grandchildren, tiny and warm, and marveled at the softness of their heads, the way they breathed. 31 descendants, 31 lives, all of them hanging invisibly from one impossible decision made in a flooding corridor. "Every birthday of mine," she said, "every happy moment of my life exists only because my father chose me instead of himself." Her hands folded in her lap. The interviewer asked what she remembered most. Maria's gaze drifted past the camera, past the room, as if the wall might open and show her the Atlantic. "Every night I see his face in the porthole," she whispered. "I hear him shouting, 'Swim to the light.' I swam to the light for 78 years. She smiled, then small, aching. "I hope he was proud of me." Maria Russo lived until 2004, 92. Near the end, when her voice grew tired and her breathing turned shallow, her family gathered around her bed. Someone held her hand. Someone brushed her hair back, the same way Antonio once had. Her eyes opened for a moment, and the last words she spoke about her father were not grand or complicated. They were simple enough to cross an ocean. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "Thank you for life. I love you." Outside the window, evening traffic moved like a ribbon of light. And if Antonio Russo could have seen it, if the Atlantic could ever give up its dead, he might have recognized in those distant headlights the very thing he had given his daughter in the storm: a path, a future, a light, and a child who kept swimming,